Welcome back, everybody, to the Alyosha Society. We're still pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. Video, let's see, where are we, Dr. Wilsey? I think we're up to video number 6. Goodness gracious, video number 6 out of 10 total videos. Students, what you should have done, and you should pause and go do it if you haven't, is read the first half of Thursday, July the 2nd. So in the previous video, Dr. Wilsey kind of brought us to the end of Wednesday and where, you know, basically victory for the Confederate Army, but it is a little more complicated than that. Lee thinks that if things go well on Thursday, it could be over. That's where we are. Now that brings us to Thursday. Now, friends, as you're reading, you are going to encounter, or you should have already encountered, an individual named Freemantle. Freemantle? Wait a second. He's not in my history. What, American history? Who is this guy? Hey, I know he's not a Union general. I know he's not a Confederate general. Who is this guy, Dr. Wilsey?
Colonel Arthur Freemantle was a British Army observer attached to the Confederate Army in an unofficial capacity. He was there for really himself. He was interested in what was happening, so he was not there in an official capacity.
Okay.
You get when you read the book, when you watch the movie, you get the idea that Freemantle is there almost as the eyes and ears of the British, as they're trying to decide whether or not to, recognize the Confederacy as a sovereign nation, whether or not they're going to try and broker a mediation between the United States and the Confederate States, and that Freemantle is there to, look in on how things are going and report back officially to the British government. That's not exactly the way things were going down. Freemantle had gotten into, the southern states. He came in through Galveston, Texas. So you also think, he's there in Virginia, Pennsylvania. Well, he had a long way to get to where he was. It took months for him to get to the Army of Northern Virginia, because he came by way of Galveston because of the Union boycott of the southern ports.
Right.
You might remember the Anaconda Plan was the plan to choke the South to death. It was the idea conceived by Winfield Scott, who had been the general-in-chief before the war, to have a blockade of the southern states with the Navy, and also to take control of the Mississippi River. That was the ultimate strategy that the Union pursued. Because of the blockade, Freemantle had to get in through, the back door. So he came in through Galveston. He actually wrote a memoir of his travels through the South later on after the war, where he talked about his experiences going through the blockade and going up through Galveston, seeing all the areas in the deep South, getting across the Mississippi River, coming across and up to Virginia, and his time with the Army of Northern Virginia, his time at Gettysburg. So if you're ever interested in reading his memoir, you can get it on Amazon. I have a copy on my shelf at home that I bought from Amazon. So it's an interesting story, but the British were not going to recognize the Confederacy, because the Confederacy was a slave republic.
Yeah.
And, as you know, the British had abolished slavery in 1833.
Yep.
And were not in favor of, and didn't ever really seriously consider recognize. Now, the French were a different story. The French were in favor of recognizing the Confederacy, but the French were never going to do anything without the leadership of the British.
Yeah. So I think that's, that touches on something I think a lot of our students may not realize, is this is an internal fight, but other countries are watching. And
Right.
other countries have a tremendous interest in how it plays out. Now I'm going to throw a curveball at you. This is something we didn't talk about, but I know you can handle this one. What country or countries would have maybe had the most interest in terms of how the war plays out and why?
Well, the Russians, the French, and the British all offered to somehow, or I should say offered, but they all considered in some way to bring like to mediate the end of the American Civil War. And they all did so on the basis of their trade relationships with the United States.
Right.
Because of cotton. Cotton was the oil. You think about oil in the 20th century and today, oil is kind of what makes the world go round.
Yeah.
Cotton made the world go round in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Because cotton fed the textile mills. And the textile mills were the first real engines of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
So the southern states in America were like Saudi Arabia in the 20th century.
That is a fascinating analogy. So these other countries,
I'm here for fascinating analogy, man.
Isn't he? Isn't he? We're calling you FA. Fascinating analogy. So yeah, that's it. That's really important, I think, for our students to know. We don't have time to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation and maybe what that might have signaled to other countries. But so students, if you're wondering, what is this guy? So I have a very sort of earthy, practical question. Okay. When we think about wars and we think about battles, we think about chaos. We think about people charging at each other and stabbing each other and shooting, and cannons there's fire and smoke and dirt. How in the world do you observe? I mean, they didn't have like bleachers, right? This is not like it's on a basketball or a soccer field. How do you observe a battle?
Well, at Gettysburg, it really was kind of like you had bleachers because
I've been there.
It's like it's undulating ridge lines.
Okay.
The Confederate position was along the crest of Seminary Ridge, which was contested on the first day, and the Confederate Army won Seminary Ridge after intense fighting all morning. And by the second day, Seminary Ridge was in under the complete control of the Confederate Army, and the Lee's headquarters were up on Seminary Ridge. And so from Seminary Ridge, it's about a mile across, a little bit less than a mile across, to Cemetery Ridge, the Emmitsburg Road in the valley between those two ridges. And so back in those days, there weren't very many trees. It was, if you go today, there are a lot of trees.
Yeah, right.
Back then, there weren't as many trees because, and the reason for that was that the people had cut all the trees down to cultivate the land.
Yeah.
And that area had been settled only for a couple of generations. So there weren't hardly any trees. And when you're standing up on Seminary Ridge and looking out across to where all the fighting was happening on day 2 and day 3, you could see very clearly what was happening with binoculars, and that's what people would have been using: binoculars, spy glasses, and also he would have been talking to, just like in the book and just like in the movie, he would have been going around talking to people. He'd have been talking to the men. He had been talking to especially the commanding officers and the officers of the Confederate Army.
So it was possible then to be at a distance where a spectator would be safe. See, that's what I'm thinking is, why in the world would you want to get near, but still use these devices like binoculars to basically still view the war.
That's right. That's
right.
That's
absolutely fascinating. Do you know if that was that common for people to be spectators? We never hear about the spectators.
It was very common. George McClellan, who, he was the second commanding general of the Union Army in the East. He had been an official in official capacity of the U.S. Army to observe the Crimean War in the 1840s.
Okay, that's absolutely fascinating. Sorry, so we got Fremantle. That makes a lot more sense now, students. I hope that whole section ought to be a little bit easier to understand. What we're going to do in the next video is finish Thursday. So let's get that set up pretty nicely here. Talk to us, Dr. Wilsey, a little bit about Thursday morning. Maybe get us until the early afternoon. How are things looking?
Badly.
Well,
well,
for whom?
I mean, I say that I have to. You probably figured out that I'm saying this from the Confederates position. Right. Georgian, man.
That's okay.
Remember, I'm that Southern boy on a Pennsylvania ridge.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So Lee's wishes.
Well, I'll tell you this, that on the night of July 1st, almost the entirety of the Union Army had come up and occupied Cemetery Hill and Cemetery Ridge. And that was not what Lee had expected them to do.
Gotcha.
The spy, Harrison, Henry Harrison, had told Lee that George Meade was going to be the new commanding officer of the new commanding general, I should say, of the Army of the Potomac. And Lee believed that George Meade was cautious, and he was cautious. He was cautious. One thing that Meade did was he listened to his subordinates. Hancock and Howard and Reynolds, who had been killed in the first day's fighting, he had been replaced by Doubleday. They had sent couriers back to Meade saying, bring the whole army up. This is the position we need to defend, not Pipe Creek. And Meade was persuaded by this. So he sent his other corps commanders up, and all night, the Union Army is marching up the Emmitsburg Road, marching up the Taneytown Road, all the roads, these roads that were converging into Gettysburg to take up their positions in Gettysburg. And Lee expected to go to bed on the night of the 1st and wake up, and that it would just be the battered remnants of the 3 corps that he had been fighting. But what he saw instead was all but one of the Union Corps had come up and had taken up positions. Now they were not spread out and disposed all along Cemetery Ridge yet, but they were all there. He also intended for his men to attack in the early morning. He wanted there to be a coordinated attack on the flanks of the Union position. So he wanted Ewell to open up when he heard Longstreet and his First Corps open up on the Union left down at Little Round Top. In the morning of the 2nd, Little Round Top had not yet been occupied by the Union forces. And Little Round Top is the key to the entire position, the entire ridgeline, because Little Round Top is a conical mountain. And there's Little Round Top and Big Round Top with a valley in between. And they're both these 2 mountains that sort of are the end of Cemetery Ridge that runs north from there. Big Round Top was covered in trees. It was covered in forest. But Little Round Top had been all the trees had been cut down by loggers, in Gettysburg over the last few years. So Little Round Top was this sort of platform that would be perfect to set artillery up on, and it would command the entire Cemetery Ridge.
Gotcha.
Whoever got there first would be able to control the entire position along Cemetery Ridge and Cemetery Hill. Lee sent one officer, I think it was like a major or maybe a colonel, I can't remember which, and I can't remember his name, but in the early morning, he sent a scout up to see if the Union soldiers had occupied Little Round Top. And it took him about 2 hours to get up there and back, because it was several miles. But when he came back at about 10 o'clock in the morning, he told Lee it was totally empty. It was the perfect place if we can get up there and we can fortify it, we got him beat. We got him beat. So he orders Longstreet. I think he says to Longstreet, I think you had better get your corps moving. It said something like that to him.
Yeah.
Remember, Longstreet didn't want to fight there.
Right.
And Shara has it right. On the afternoon of the 1st, Lee is exultant because they had taken the town.
Yep.
And Longstreet was also excited because he said, now, see, we've beaten them, and now we can move around to their left and get between them and Washington and fight on ground of our own choosing. And Lee was like, what? The enemy is here. I'm going to fight him here because the enemy is here. Why would we withdraw once we've already defeated them? Well, the next day on the 2nd, Longstreet still wants to move out of that position. He does not want to attack the Union position up on Cemetery Ridge because he knows what that is. It's a castle. It's a fortress. But nevertheless, Robert E. Lee was commanding the Army of Northern Virginia, so he got his men moving. And long story short, he attacks starting at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He attacks with his divisions under Hood and under McLaws. And those divisions were instructed to go up the Emmitsburg Road, attack up the Emmitsburg Road, and attack in echelon, which was this. The tactics were you send a body of men to attack, right? And then while they're attacking, the enemy will move more men off of their lines over, say, to the north or to the east. They'll reinforce the position that's being attacked, but then they'll weaken their line over here. So one unit attacks, the enemy will reinforce and weakening their line. Then another unit will come up and attack where that weak point is, and then continue on like stair steps. And the idea there is to get the enemy to shift his men along a line and weaken the line where it's being attacked by advances. So that was the strategy, and it darn near well worked. But here's something really fascinating about what Shara covers with Chamberlain. Chamberlain and his 20th Maine are part of a brigade. They're a regiment, part of a brigade under the command of Colonel Vincent Strong. Vincent Strong sees that there are no soldiers. There's nobody up on Little Round Top except for some Union signalmen that are waving flags and signaling. So he goes up there, he's all by himself, and he says to the signalmen, keep wagging your flags to make the Confederates think that, there's a massive amount of men available. Just keep doing that so that they'll see you up here, right? Mm-hmm. Just so that they'll know it's not completely unoccupied. So they were up there wig-wagging their signal flags. They weren't even really saying anything. They were just signaling really more to the Confederates than to their own men.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Strong Vincent got his brigade to go and occupy the heights, and the 20th Maine was one of, I think, 3 regiments that were up there, up on the heights. Now, by the time the 20th Maine is deployed into position on Little Round Top, if they had been 15 minutes late, let me put it to you this way. An Alabama regiment under the command of William Oates had just climbed up Big Round Top, the forested bigger mountain. They were able to look down on Little Round Top. And when they were up on top of Big Round Top, they could look down and see there wasn't anybody on Little Round Top. But Oates wanted to defend Big Round Top because they had gotten to the top. They had a whole regiment up there. And they had axemen, and all the axemen could clear the trees pretty quickly within an hour or so. Mm. And they could drag artillery up there, and from Big Round Top, they could dominate the entire position. Mm-hmm. Asked permission to do that, and he was denied. And he said, no, you will attack Little Round Top and gain those heights. Well, he was frustrated, but he could see that there was nobody down there.
Mm.
Ordered his regiment to go down the hill into the valley, and they expected to get up to the crest of Little Round Top, and there wouldn't be anybody there, just like they had looked down and seen that there was nobody there. But in the time that it took for them to get down the hill and halfway up Little Round Top, Strong Vincent's brigade was already there.
Oh,
it was 15 minutes of time between Oates moving his regiment down Big Round Top and up Little Round Top, and Strong Vincent's brigade coming up and occupying Little Round Top and having the fight that you read about in the book. So all that to say that we're talking about a knife edge on the clock. Had Oates's regiment gotten to Little Round Top, they would have been able to hold off anything that the Union Army had thrown at them, and it would have been a Confederate victory on the second day. You know,
crazy about that. That's
crazy.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to halfway through our discussion on Thursday, July the 2nd. So let's take a break. And in the next video, students, what I want you to do is go ahead and finish reading all of Thursday, July 2nd, and then we'll cover the rest of that. And then let me see, that'll be video number 7. Yeah. Then we'll get into Friday, and then we'll kind of wrap it up in our final video with sort of some big picture questions. But Dr. Wilsey, are you up for another one?
Man, let's do it.
It's like a marathon. All right, students, this has been video number 6 out of 10 total on the Killer Angels. We'll see you soon, friends, for video number 7. Get your reading done first.